Today, we live in a digital age. Everything we do revolves around data and electricity. Remove these two elements, and collective productivity would literally plummet. However, there was a point in this country where Lady Electron did not rule it all. The world was formerly dominated by oil. Everything society produced depended on oil production. Ships, trains, heavy machinery, food, and even medicine depended on the production of oil. Naturally, such a widely used commodity would be produced by several giants competing for market share. But what if in our case, oil production was monopolized by one man? We can naturally induce that if one man controlled this vastly used resource, he also indirectly but surely controlled the world in a sense. This induction was indeed done by many, which led to countless conspiracies around not just his name, but his entire family lineage. Are these conspiracies true, or are they just fallacies created by haters? Well, there's no need to speculate, for we can go to the man himself for an answer. In his own words, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." This is the story of John D. Rockefeller. John Davidson Rockefeller was born on July 8, 1839 in Richford, New York, a small town upstate near Syracuse. Rockefeller was raised in a large family. He had an older sister and 4 younger siblings. His father, William Anderson Rockefeller, was a traveling salesman and con artist. He was frequently absent and led a vagabond life, selling supposedly secret cures and potions. He became notorious for shady schemes and actually lived a double life, having a second family with a mistress. Rockefeller's father would not just cheat the public, but his family as well. He once bragged, "I cheat my boys every chance I get. I want to make them sharp." Rockefeller's father thought to always get the better part of any deal. We will later see that his son took this message to heart. Rockefeller's mother is Eliza Davidson. She was quite the opposite of his father. She was a homemaker and devout Baptist. She was very thrifty and lived a frugal religious lifestyle. The message she taught her son was efficiency. Let nothing go to waste. Use everything you have. She specifically ingrained in Rockefeller that willful waste makes woeful want. Rockefeller would also take this lesson to heart. Years later, the family left New York and moved to Cleveland, Ohio. It is in this area that young Rockefeller would start making his impact. When Rockefeller was 16, he got his first job as a bookkeeper working for a produce commission firm called Hewitt & Tootle. In this job as a bookkeeper, Rockefeller became particularly skilled at calculating transportation costs. Much of his duties dealt with negotiating with barge canal owners, ship captains, and freight agents. In these negotiations, Rockefeller learned that transportation rates people believed were fixed could actually be negotiated down through the use of timing and preferential treatments from shippers. This lesson will prove invaluable later in his career. As a young man, Rockefeller declared that his 2 goals in life were to 1. Make $100,000, the equivalent of $3 million today, and 2. Live to 100 years old. Spoiler alert, these 2 goals would be pretty much accomplished. I mention this only to show that contrary to popular opinion, life gives us exactly what we want, if we are willing to pay the price for it, of course. So ask carefully. At the age of 20, Rockefeller left bookkeeping and went into the produce commission business for himself. He found a partner, Morris B. Clark, and together, they raised $4,000 in capital. This was the year 1859. The business steadily grew and yielded solid profits every year. Then the Civil War happened. As a result of mobilization, the Union Army called for massive amounts of foodstuff. Rockefeller, who was in a produce commission business, saw his profits soar. While his brother Frank fought in the Civil War, Rockefeller hired substitute soldiers to fight in his place. Yeah, you could do that back in the days. Rockefeller was actually a devout abolitionist and felt strongly about the Civil War. However, he believed that his presence was needed more in business than on the battlefield. He would go on to say, "I wanted to go into the army and do my part, but it was simply out of the question. There was no one to take my place. We were in a new business, and if I had not stayed, it would have stopped, and with so many dependent on it." As the Civil War came to an end, so did the lucrative profits from the produce business. As a response, Rockefeller and his business partner Clark shifted to the refining of crude oil. There was an oil drilling glut at the time, with thousands of speculators looking to make a fortune. Most of them failed, but those who stuck around till they found oil did not need to be efficient to realize a profit. Oil was so expensive that drillers would just blow holes in the ground and gather up as much oil as they could. There was no real systematic process for this new field. Rockefeller saw these inefficiencies as his opportunity and promptly entered the industry. Rockefeller built his first oil refinery in 1863 in a region called the Flats, a burgeoning industrial area in Cleveland. The refinery was called Andrews, Clark and Company. It was composed of Rockefeller, Morris B. Clark, his former partner in the produce business, and Samuel Andrews, a brilliant chemist from England. The crude oil industry was hot at the time. Whale oil, yes, it came from a whale, was very expensive. Kerosene, a cheaper alternative extracted from petroleum, became more predominant. Energy needs were skyrocketing, and this collective pain point sparked the boom that would pave Rockefeller's fortune. To my regular viewers who saw the episode on Henry Ford or Planned Parenthood, I hope you are noticing a pattern. That is, honest individuals become wealthy by solving a collective pain point, which, if you also notice, differs throughout the ages. In the era of Henry Ford, for an example, the collective pain point was transportation. In the era of this episode, that of Rockefeller's, it is cheap energy. Pay attention to your era. What is a collective pain point you can solve? Anyway, back to our timeline. As mentioned already, the oil boom happening during the time of Rockefeller was very wasteful, not just at the point of drilling, but also at the refinery level. Most refineries would keep the 60% of oil that became kerosene and dump the remaining 40% into the river. This polluted and made the Ohio rivers highly flammable, by the way. Having the habit of thrift drilled into him by his mother at a young age, Rockefeller wanted no such waste. He used the remaining 40% as gasoline to fuel his own refinery, dropping his production costs significantly. Little did he know, but this gasoline other refineries were throwing away would become a giant industry in of itself. Rockefeller's wealth would later soar as gasoline grew in importance. Rockefeller also turned the remaining byproducts of his refinery into sellable goods, such as lubricating oil, petroleum jelly, tar, and paraffin wax. Thanks to these efficiencies from Rockefeller, oil production costs at his refinery went down from $2.50 to just 96 cents a barrel. With oil selling for $13 a barrel at the time, that is a profit margin of $12. With the stream of money coming in, Rockefeller reinvested and even borrowed money to buy out his business partner Clark in 1865. The firm was then renamed to Rockefeller and Andrews. 5 years later, in 1870, Rockefeller restructured the firm and formed Standard Oil of Ohio. He would also buy out Andrews in 1874 and another partner, Henry Flagler, in 1875, leaving him as the sole original founder of the company. He continued to apply his technique of efficiency, and soon, Standard Oil became the most profitable refiner in Ohio. But this was not enough for the ambitious Rockefeller. From there, he adopted a pattern of buying the least efficient competing refiner and improving the efficiency of the newly acquired operations. Rockefeller would also press for discounts on shipments for his oil from the railroad companies. In many instances, when Rockefeller was acquiring a business, he merely had to reveal his books and show them what they were up against. He would then make them a decent offer. If they refused, he He told them he would run them into bankruptcy by selling his oil below production costs, and then cheaply buy up their assets at auction once the competitor goes bankrupt. Over a period of 4 months in 1872, in what was later known as the Cleveland Conquest or the Cleveland Massacre, Standard Oil absorbed 22 of his 26 Cleveland competitors. But again, Rockefeller would not be satisfied. He actually became famous for saying, "Competition is a sin." His pattern of buying inefficient competitors would spread throughout the country. In a Darwinian survival of the fittest manner, he would gobble up the weakest link using all sorts of shady techniques. He would sell his oil below cost. He would get preferential price treatment for his oil shipments, while at the same time limiting the number of train shipments available to the competitor. He did this by leveraging his close relationships with the railroad companies. Rockefeller would bribe legislators. He would purchase all the refinery equipments to starve his competitor. He would buy up equipment supplier businesses themselves and then refuse to sell replacement parts to his competitors, and so on. When a competing business inevitably folded, Rockefeller would absorb them and move on to the next one. Two of the former rivals he had acquired, Pratt and Rogers, partnered up with Rockefeller and helped them form Standard Oil Trust, the first entity of its kind in the world. Let's pause here and recognize this new innovation by Rockefeller, the trust. Since Rockefeller was gobbling up companies and assets all over the country, he needed an entity that could encapsulate all the numerous companies he owned across multiple states. State laws at the time limited the scope in which enterprises can operate. Many states imposed special taxes on out-of-state corporations doing business in their locality. Other states forbade corporations in their state from holding the stocks of companies based elsewhere. This created an administrative and tax nightmare for anyone who had companies in numerous states like Rockefeller did. On January 2, 1882, Rockefeller and his lawyers combined their disparate companies spread across dozens of states under a single group of trustees. This gave Rockefeller centralized control and veto power on all the corporate boards within his conglomerate. Standard Oil's organizational concept proved so successful that other giant enterprises adopted this trust form. Hence, the trust was born. Rockefeller's Standard Oil would continue growing, but as its operations expanded, so did its list of haters. Soon, a clash would come when a Pennsylvania railroad company decided to challenge the rebates Rockefeller enjoyed and demanded higher prices to ship his oil. Here again, we see the genius of Rockefeller at work at its finest. Instead of capitulating and paying the Pennsylvania Railroad the shipment price it had demanded, Rockefeller began to use pipelines as an alternative means to transport oil and began a major campaign to build them. Most people don't typically think of Rockefeller when they hear of an oil pipeline, but again, this was an innovation he streamlined. The railroad company responded by also building pipelines, which Rockefeller interpreted as full-on war. As a result, Rockefeller held back all oil shipments that used the Pennsylvania Railroad, essentially starving the company of a significant source of its revenue. This battle ended with the Pennsylvania Railroad Company folding and selling its oil interest to Rockefeller. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled 90% of the world oil market. Rockefeller had not only consolidated the industry, but he integrated its operations both vertically and horizontally. For those of you who are unfamiliar, horizontal integration is when a business grows by acquiring a similar company in their industry at the same point in the supply chain. Rockefeller buying another oil refinery is an example of horizontal integration. Vertical integration, on the other hand, is when a business expands by acquiring another company that operates before or after them in the supply chain. Rockefeller acquiring a railroad company that ships the oil is an example of vertical integration. Another example of vertical integration would be the acquisition of an oil drilling company. These two represent points before and after refinery in the supply chain. Well, that's enough of the business course and the end of part 1 of this episode. In part 2, we will look at the breaking up of Standard Oil, Rockefeller's philanthropic ventures, and of course, a few conspiracies surrounding the Rockefellers. Since this is a location channel, I would also like to say that one good location to check out is the Rockefeller Archive Center in New York. It is a repository that contains records about the Rockefeller family and their philanthropic projects. This location is free to visit and will be available for you to save on a Cityscape app. So what do you think of Rockefeller so far? Do you see him as a business genius or a power-hungry madman who's out to destroy the competitor at all costs? To leave on a bright note, we should remember that the ultimate winner in all this was not Rockefeller, but the consumer. Thanks to Rockefeller's ceaseless pursuit towards efficiency, the price of oil plummeted from 30 cents a gallon to just 8 cents a gallon. In today's language, that would be like gas going from $10 a gallon to just $2.66 a gallon. Now I'm sure you can appreciate Mr. Rockefeller with these kind of savings. See you next time.